This video is for Chapter 3 on books, and it's going to cover the effects of the printing press and books in printing in the New World, i.e. the colonies. The effects of the printing press were really enormous. It's impossible to overstate this. We discussed it already, but the growth of book publishing after the Gutenberg press was such that in about a 50-year period, you have between 8 and 20 million copies of books out there floating around in Europe. Authorities or experts on the topic dispute the exact number, but even if you go with the low end, 8 million, that's still a ton of books. And of course, when you have that many new ideas floating around out there available to the public, you're going to have a threat to those in power. And in this case, we're talking about the crown, so royalty, the kings and queens of Europe at the time, and the church, which was the Catholic Church. And so as a result, you're going to see an enormous undergoing of change in Europe happening directly as a result of the Gutenberg printing press, I would say. Now let's fast forward over to books in the New World. And I have to say, books were not central to pilgrims coming over, to people coming over to the New World. You're on a ship. First of all, your focus is on survival. You get there, you're surviving on the ship, you're surviving once you get to the new land. You know nothing about, the eastern seaboard. And also, because the first people who came over from Europe to the United States, or to the colonies at the time, it wasn't even the colonies, but just to the New World, they were kind of religious in nature, and wealth and status were not a priority. That kind of made you look like you were engaged in the wrong things. And let's face it, even though we had the printing press, books were still pretty expensive for the average person. I mean, they were way more available, as we just saw, but still on the expensive side. And one last thing, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie The Piano that came out a long time ago, but this woman comes over from Europe and she's got this huge piano that shows up on the shore, after she gets off the ship, and her, I guess, newly appointed husband is like, yeah, that piano, that's not coming with us. So I just want you to think books are not quite, the same size as a piano, but if you had to lug around your books everywhere, they're heavy. When you move from one place to another and you take your books are the thing that's the box that's the heaviest out of all the things that you have. So books were just not central at this time. All right, some history on the printing press. Mexico City, we can give a nod to Mexico as being home of the first book that was printed in the Americas in 1539. It was a religious text, of course, because most things were religious texts at the time. And over in the colonies, Harvard actually got the first printing press, and we get our first book printed in the colonies. The whole book of Psalms, and your book says 1644. If you look at the picture that's actually here, it's in your book too, it says 1640, and actually you'll see in other articles and stuff that it also says 1640. I posted an article from the New York Times, so not sure what the dispute is there, but figure somewhere in the 1640s we get the first book printed in the colonies. All right, governmental control in the colonies. We had a threat to those in power back in Europe when the printing press first came around, and now we're fast forward a couple of hundred years, and we're going to start to see a common theme coming up in all of these chapters about different media. The theme is that those in power get really threatened when new media comes around. So this is the beginning of printing for everyone, and as a way of controlling those new ideas, Britain says to the colonies, in order to print anything, you have to have permission from the colonial governors at the time, which means that if you have something that is going against what the crown back in Britain wants, the colonial governors who are loyal to Britain are going to say, no, you can't print that. So it's a form of, censorship or control. This culminates in the Stamp Act in March 1765. Now, Britain was starting to impose taxes, and look at this date. We're really close to the American Revolution, and the people in the colonies are really getting sick of being taxed from Britain. Now, this tax was about using paper that had an official seal on it. And this was for everything. It didn't matter what you printed, it had to have this official seal on it, and you had to pay for this. So this was expensive, and it was designed to get money for their government, who was going to be engaged with a war with the French. But again, it was meant to also stifle free speech, because if you have to get this paper that has this official seal on it, if you're trying to print something that the authorities don't want you to do, you're not going to be able to get this paper. So there's a huge revolt from the colonists. In fact, so much so that the Stamp Act never actually gets enacted. It's overthrown before you know it. Now, preceding this, or actually after this, we get more taxation acts coming out of Britain. We're not going to cover that, but you can see we're getting really close to the American Revolution when the colonialists are just going to say, screw it, we're not taking this anymore, we're revolting. So that's the